now. Okay, so welcome to PPM's debut Pink Panther Presents Artist and Author Talks. Today's guest, author Joanne Carota, lives outside the Boston area with her husband, Mark, nearby her adult children. She's a lifelong Massachusetts resident, in part because it's the best seafood in the world. She teaches writing at UMass Lowell and holds an MFA from Solstice and an MA in Writing and Literature from Rivier University. In past lives, she worked at MIT Lincoln Lab, Lockheed Martin, and Textron. Joanne has been published in Pink Panther, Merrimack Journal, Chelmsford Independent, Middlesex Beat, Andover Townsman, and the Subtopian. In January 2018, she received the Sterling Watson Fellowship to attend Writers in Paradise, Eckerd College. So please help me welcome Joanne.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm happy that you're here and you're endeavoring on the first ever Let's Troubleshoot Everything session. So, I mean, you know, we're living in very unusual times, and you and I share a lot of things in common. You know, we're both writers, we share our alma mater, and we're both teachers at the college level. And so, you know, what does your fall term look like currently? Are you doing face-to-face, online, a hybrid of these?
So we're synchronous in the English department. We're synchronous, virtual, and remote. Okay. So I'm working at home, and yeah, we planned all summer. We spent most of our summer trying to get ready for this. So there was so much training, and actually they did such a great job with the training. It was amazing. And so now we're implementing and learning as we go, and making some mistakes. And thank goodness for the breakout rooms. We do a lot of work in the breakout rooms with groups and individual writing. So it's kind of fun on that respect to kind of reframe the classroom and learn something new. But sometimes it's something that would take you a couple of sentences in the classroom is now 5 different transactions. And, you know, and sometimes you see the students lose faith, like, does she know what she's doing, you know? And the answer most of the time is no, but I'm learning, so.
I'm only teaching at Saginaw Valley this term, and some of us are teaching face-to-face with some hybrid online options. And so, but we can only meet with half of our students, which means you have to split the class in half. And so if you teach them all on the same day, you teach the same class twice, right, in a 40-minute session. And I am just exhausted. It doesn't matter if I teach 6 classes or 3 classes, I am exhausted. But you kind of just filled in a blank for me where I was like, I'm used to going in the class. And I'm like, why is it hitting me so much harder? And I think it's because it takes, right, you say, usually you could do it in 2 sentences, and it turns into like a double unit and they're looking at you like, and I think part of it is we have, right, Kat Fitzpatrick, we were just talking recently, and I think she called it COVID brain or something, where it's like your brain is a little bit mush. And so, yes, we know what we're doing, but yes, our brain is a little bit mush, just like yours, and there's a delay, right? And then the transfer and the receipt of that. So that's been a really interesting thing for me personally. And it doesn't matter if I'm online or if I'm in person. It's still that same, right? I was thinking of it as like a hiccup, but it makes sense. There's just so much more that has to be done to bridge those, not even the gaps, to bridge thoughts, like to connect, right, the transition between one thought.
And they're the first incoming class. I teach college writing, first year writing program, and they're the first incoming class, so they're kind of you know, the R&D people for this, so to speak. And you can see the wheels kind of like, is this going to work? Am I comfortable here? They're making a lot of decisions about their future, and we're hoping they hang in, because we do think it's going to get better, number one, and eventually this situation will end and we'll be back in the classrooms. Right.
And I think this will shape them in a different way. That will just make them, right? So I call myself the gatekeeper. I teach all different levels of English and writing, but this term, and I always have multiple freshman comp classes, and I say I'm the gatekeeper. right? So I'm equipping you not just with all the essay skills you need, but it's kind of like the life skills that hopefully you take beyond the class. And I feel like, right, this particular term for these students who are, right, they are the first incoming students to experience something quite like this, that it will just prepare them better, right, for a world that may, right, may include things like this, obstacles, that hopefully it makes them better, you know, not just better equipped, but better problem solvers, right? Which clearly we have a little bit of an issue of that right now with the adults in charge of things. And so maybe this is, right, this is like, you know, if you could try to find a silver lining in it for them, that it would help them, right, be.
Yeah, I think this generation is very not entitled, and they're very serious, and they're looking towards the future. They want their environment clean. They have some great community thoughts, and they want to join in community, and they miss being out in the, you know, in the community. So I have a lot of hope for this generation. I think they're pretty interesting and kind of a throwback.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So now you have this, right, and this new undertaking of teaching during COVID, and there's all these learning curves, a lot of extra time on task for, you know, preparation and going back and troubleshooting with other instructors. How could we do this better? And so how do you cultivate a writer's life amidst just a regular teaching career, but also, you know, during these times, and then, you know, balance it against a personal life also?
Well, I'll tell you, the marketing part was a challenge at first. In fact, I had published, I self-published back in July of 2019. And so I was on this great little plan, and I was implementing it, and then it came to a screeching halt, obviously. And the idea of marketing a book for me seemed extremely distasteful when people were dying, not to mention nobody cares. They're reading the paper, they're listening to Dr. Fauci. Like, they're not really interested in reading, you know, your book at that point. So I kind of put it on hold from maybe March until June. And then I took out some ads and started kind of pushing it. So my writing life is more right now marketing the book versus actually writing. I have some, I'm circling the wagons. I have some ideas. I write, obviously, in my journal every day I write, and these kind of writerly things that we do. But I don't have the novel started yet. I've got pages, but nothing, you know, to follow yet. So I'm not writing.
No, that's okay. But, you know, even when you take those times, right, sometimes it's time to be the observer and, right, the meditator. And so I find that I'm composing and thinking about lots of, right, I haven't tackled a book length work. I actually put off publishing my debut self-help book for the same reasons, where I was like, this isn't the right time. But how much of the timing will it be when, you know, like this fall, I'm going to get back on it, because I don't want to delay much longer. But I write smaller works, shorter works, and, you know, short stories and poems. And I'm constantly thinking, right, meditating. So I take these moments of, oh my God, I haven't written, right, in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, not a thing, right? And I'm writing, I write every day, right? Other people's books, but I'm like, what am I going to do? How can you call yourself a writer? You haven't written any, you know, you're an author. And so I had to, like, take a step back and say, sometimes you're supposed to rest. And that doesn't mean you're inactive. We're not, right? It doesn't mean like you're closing your eyes and going to sleep. It means you're changing, right? And you've got to change that.
Yeah, you're processing, you're planning. I'm in an observing phase, so I'm observing things. And it actually feels good, because I was so consumed with the writing and the editing and getting the book out there that it feels like my brain does need to rest a little, not to mention, you know, we're a little bit in trauma, post-trauma after being shut down. And in Massachusetts, you know, I'm sure you saw the statistics. It was pretty rough there. We had the highest numbers at one point, you know, behind maybe New York. And so it was kind of terrifying. And in Middlesex County is where I live, and the numbers were the highest. So it was a little scary there for a while. And yeah, so things have lightened up, and we're on the New Hampshire border. So they've done very well, and Vermont has done incredible. And Maine did pretty well. Of course, Maine didn't want Massachusetts people there. So. there was that. Yeah, I don't blame them.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I live in a very rural area, and the risks are obviously a lot lower. And so it is very interesting to talk to people. So we're a little bit more lax about a lot of things just because we're like, right? There are no numbers encroaching on us. And so I talk to people like, it's interesting to talk to people like you. I moved a daughter to New York, upstate New York though, a few weeks ago. And, just talking to people right when I can, just the way everybody was freaking out there. And it was like, wow, chill out, and everybody had a different set of rules that, they added on top of the regulations, and you just learned them as you went to every different place. And it was very stressful and in a different way. And it was very eye-opening for me to see like, okay, there are places, right? So I can live in my little bubble, and it's affecting us differently. And my husband and I, we're in the viral disinfectant industry. So it's not like we're completely above risk. It's just different. And we can walk out our front door. We don't put a mask on. I walk down the street, I run, I pass nobody on the dirt roads. So like, and sometimes I get in the car and then I go to do something and I forget, oh my God, I'm halfway up to this, and I'm like, I need a mask, and then I have to go back and get it because I literally it's not a part of my everyday. And I lucked out, right, to be able to be home and completely away from that. It was another perk of this is why we moved out to the country. But it's very real, and it exists, and it's affecting different people, especially when the populations are larger and people are living closer together. It affects people differently. And so it is very interesting and eye-opening for me to hear you talk about that and to go elsewhere and experience that. But I want to get back to, so I was going to wait to the end, but because you already brought up the self-publishing, let's talk briefly about that, and then we'll transition into the actual book. So you went with the self-publishing process for years. And so how did you decide on this route for publication?
So I went the traditional submissions. My history with this book is long and detailed, but in 2006, I went to my niece's wedding in Boston. And well, it was in Winchester at the church, and then it was in Boston at Anthony's Pier 4, which is not there anymore. The old staples from Boston are all kind of wiped out. There was Anthony's and Jimmy's and all these great big restaurants from the day. And so it was a beautiful wedding, and right on the ocean. And then we stayed at the Seaport Hotel and then walked across to the Fish Pier the next morning, and it had this, and as a poet, you'll really understand this, it had this kind of gritty, like the seeds of maybe a dandelion kind of floating around. That's how I get inspired. It's like this kind of molecular inspiration. And it just felt really interesting. It was misty and smoky and kind of like the cover of the book. And so I was taking a detective fiction class the next semester for my master's in writing and literature at Rivier University in New Hampshire. And I really didn't want to take the class. I wasn't really interested in that. I wanted to write the great American novel, so to speak. So I did take it, and it ended up being the book, which really worked out great. Larry Manis was the professor who's a writer as well. And it kind of took hold there. And then when I graduated, I ended up teaching at UMass Lowell. And then I decided to go to Pine Manor, that's where we met. And I picked up the pages I had written and said, well, this is something I can submit for, my application. Got in, and then I stayed with it. So I stayed with it through the semester and worked with some mentors. And I worked on my creative thesis with Sterling Watson and Dennis Lehane's old, mentor at one time. And he was great for me, because I could get pages out, and he kind of just left me alone, and that's how I have to work. I choose to work much better than that way than somebody trying to edit me. And it's, not that he didn't kind of have suggestions and lots of edits, but I was kind of left to my own devices. So then through the years, I was submitting. I did a post-grad with him as well. And then I started submitting in 2015 in February. Well, I had some friends who said that they thought that the novel was in great shape. And 10 years ago, it probably would have been published. But the big five are all in flux right now. Everything's shifting. And they need a bestseller out of the gate. You know, agents and editors aren't going to take a debut novelist unless, you know, there's some great thing happening or, you know, the stars were aligned properly. So I watched the cycle and I just said, okay, well, I don't want to do this anymore. And I decided to self-publish, went to a Christmas party next door and across the street. And my neighbor, who was the editor of the Boston Herald for years, and his wife as well, who now works at UMass Lowell, said, send me the novel, I'll take a look at it. So he did, and then we talked, and he had done a lot of research about self-publishing and kind of pushed me towards Amazon because, you know, at the time, CreateSpace had already merged with Amazon, but there was Ingram Spark, and I didn't want to do both. A lot of people do 3 different platforms or 4, Barnes & Noble, Ingram Spark, you know. I just stuck with Amazon, and he did the layout. He took a package, so he was gone from the Herald, but he had some friends that also had left, and they kind of helped him with the cover. And I was so pleased with the cover because I was going to put the Fish Pier building there and doctor it up. And he's like, no, you know, that's just a building. That doesn't say fish. What? So I was like, okay, I get it. But yeah, so listen to the experts, so to speak. And so then after I decided, it was very empowering. I like it. And actually a friend of mine calls it artisanal publishing now, not self-published. So it went from the old vanity where, you know, you hid yourself in shame to, you know, the self-publishing and now indie and now artisanal kind of, which I like. I like the sound of that because so much work goes into it. And we talk about, oh, look at that, that's handmade, or he built that house with his own hands. And then when somebody makes the effort to publish and nurture and bring something to life, it's kind of dismissed, you know, so it's an interesting dichotomy there. So I felt good about it. I like I liked the cover. I love the layout. You did a great job on the layout. And I love my story. So it kind of was really fun and great to get it out there. When you get it in your hand after it's been on your computer forever, then it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I know. And a lot of the things that you're saying are totally resonating with me. And, you know, unfortunately, there have been so many people who just publish anything and so and it's not, I don't know that I'm very aware of it happening as much anymore, but I can remember 10 years ago when I really started getting serious, or 11 years ago, and people were self-publishing, and, you know, people were like, don't do it. And so I started looking at some of the things that were being self-published, and I was appalled, right? It was like, oh my God, everybody wants to be an author. Everybody wants to be a poet. And so I think, what's the term? Artisanal?
Artisanal, yes.
Artisanal. Okay. So what exactly is that? Like,
it's a fancy word of saying, you know, just really nice. Good job, you know, something that's handmade and, you know,
gotcha.
an artist.
Right. No, so I love that. And I've read some really great self-published books. And so I'm actually working with it's like a hybrid version. So for my debut self-help book, same thing. I started sending it out, and I know it's a great book, and I'm very proud of the work. And you know, I don't have the following yet, and I don't have the marketing savvy to really take the book where I want to take it. And so I'm going to invest in someone who partners with me to do these things. And so I'm really excited about the process. I mean, doing a ton of stuff behind the scenes to get ready to do that. And so technically I am self-publishing in a sense where I own the control and decide, what feedback I will and will not accept, and what, you know, creative presentation and things. But I really like how your process of going, you're like, I had a neighbor, and then I went, and then, you know, it was like this chain of events. I think a lot of people dismiss the potency of networking. right? It's like networking. And I tell, like, I resume coach people, especially my students, right? Like, tell them, like, don't just think you're going to go through college and then you're going to graduate with this certificate and then say, what's next? And then try to go find work amongst all the other college graduates. You need to get in there and build your network. Most of the time you'll get hired right away at a place you've already interned and worked in the summers, and you develop relationships. And those people are the ones who write you the stellar letters of recommendation that get you into grad school, get you into med school. And how I think writers really don't entirely, or some of them don't at all, they don't understand the network and how, and I don't even mean like your neighbor wasn't obligated to help you, but that you knew you had somebody you could trust, and you had enough of a relationship where you weren't like knocking on his door like, I know we've only talked twice in 10 years since we lived here, but right, you had a relationship with this person to where you could go and right away, right, the interest, hey, send it to me. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, he was very generous to do that, and he just happened to have a time in his life where it would fit in, so that was great. It was just everything kind of aligned, because by that time it was like, yeah, I got a book, you know, you don't want to bother people, or, you know, nothing has happened with it, so you're not really screaming from the rooftops that you have this manuscript that's on your computer. That
there's something about timing, right?
Timing's everything.
Timing is, so the timing was right, and clearly, right, in so many other ways the timing was right. So it's like all these things fell into place because it was the time. It wasn't like you were trying to force something to happen, right, and not getting the support, right? That's
and people sniff that out right away. If you're not authentic, if you're just, you know, sniffing around and kind of bothering people, you know,
right.
They don't have time, and they're not going to like it anyways. So,
right.
Yeah.
And when you're excited about your book and your writing, then it's, you know, it's easy to get other people excited about it. And it's easier. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's easier to then get behind it and market it, even if you're not a salesperson, because you're like, oh my God, you've got to read this. It's so good. And so that's a super important thing as well, right? That pride in the finished product.
If you get a few good readers, they're your best friends. I got an email the other day. It was so sweet, by Joyce, a reader. I really enjoyed the docs. Are you going to write another book? It was so sweet. And, you know, that's worth $1 million to me. It's just the nicest compliment. And the fact that somebody took the time to write to you, it's so cool.
Absolutely. So, okay, all right. So we kind of covered, right? Obviously you would do this way again in the future, right?
Yeah, I like the empowerment as well, to tell you the truth. I would, you know, when I write the sequel, which is, I'm hoping it will be a sequel, I will submit it for a little bit, but not as long as I did before. And, but, you know, I'm not going to wait that long, because, you know, the thing that happens too is, especially in this case, the docs changed from the time that I first, and that was the crux of the story, how it was the new world and the old world, but the new world was emerging, and it was like taking off like a race car. I mean, the buildings were going up, old things were, so I had to stay ahead of that all the time through the years. And sometimes it got a little, like we went to Durgan Park, which is this old restaurant, for New Year's Eve 2018. And I was like, oh, it's for my book and the, you know, all this stuff. And then 3 days later it closes. Okay. Talk about it in the past. So there's, you know, unless you want to write the book in the past, but I didn't. It was a current day book.
Right, which is another, yeah, you're bringing up some really interesting points, that, right, that whole currency thing, we don't really think about the timeliness of it, like that, right, the world changes. That's so true. And that's, I mean, that's so frustrating when.
Now it's going to be post-pandemic, pre-pandemic writing. So how do we get our arms? And we don't know when are we going to get the vaccinations? When are we going to be free again, so to speak?
Right.
And so nobody's touching pandemic writing right now, I don't think.
Well, I think people are touching it. Like, I am seeing people do it.
More real time though, like what's happening now. And,
right.
You know, because there are so many futuristic novels that talk about something like this happening.
Right.
I believe Pine Manor, the speaker from Pine Manor's graduation, wrote a novel about a virus taking over. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name right now. But when she graduated, yeah.
Wow.
know.
Yeah, so yeah, it will be interesting to see the writing that comes out of, post, like what's being, right, the novel length works that are being published. I do see a lot of, I'm already seeing anthologies coming out, but people are writing about, living right in the midst of a pandemic, which is a little bit different than having, like, stepping back after it, right? It's starting to resolve itself, or things are starting to tame, or maybe they're not, and right, so we've had some time to think about how do you write these storylines in believable ways, right? Because the face of the world changes, just like the face of that dock changed. I never even thought about that. I guess that would be anywhere you go. If you were writing about a real place that you right, that you would have to say, this is that's,
and of course it's fiction, so I could have gone any which way, and I did add, other docs. There's different things in there that is totally fiction.
But still
Yeah.
To get that, where if you could, like, you can take the book, right, and you've read it, but you imagine holding the book in your hand and standing in these places going, oh my God, right? I'm here.
Yeah.
And
I spent a lot of time on the docks, hanging around.
Yeah, I get it. I write people's memoirs for a company I work for. I ghostwrite them. And there's a couple of clients that I've actually put in more time because I'm like, I have to go back and figure out how it was to stand on this beach in Sicily. And like, the books turn out beautiful. And, this one particular client, I was like, he was from these like rural areas, and they're still rural in that area, but there's a lot of stores that are no longer there, and there's a lot of farms that have been knocked down and developed. And I was doing that research because I wanted to make sure I didn't modernize it when it happened 60 years ago. I wanted to make sure I got that right for the 60-year-ago mark, not for, right, the store names or how the street looked then or now instead of then. And so it was a reverse, like having to go back and make sure I got it accurate. But I was like, I can get it. You could get lost in that for days.
I know, that's the fun part. You can also become a procrastinator while you're doing your research.
Right. You just, right. So, but we teach research. So, that's on our wheelhouse. We like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, all right. So without further ado, let's talk about your debut novel, The Docks.
Okay.
So my first curiosity is, take us back to that inspiration moment at the family wedding when you first realized there was an entire novel hiding on these Boston docks.
So as I mentioned, we had the wedding and it was a festive mode, and then the next day we're the breakfast after a wedding, and then, we're walking and just kind of feeling things and, absorbing. With family have flown in, all different people. So it's kind of, reflective. The day after a wedding, you're always kind of in a reflective mood anyways. And then, as I said, I, took the class. And so then I wrote it, and, it changed through the years. It changed a lot. Kate was a kind of an oddball to begin with, which was off the Xers, the Gen Xers and the millennials, the Xers being a little bit nihilistic in some ways, and millennials being very much looking for approval from their parents, and so she was kind of more of a Z, like a Z Gen, like the kids are today, ahead of her time. And she was 29 at first, and she was living in her office and living at home at the same. So she'd sleep in her office, and then she'd go home and kind of connect with her parents. And I thought, well, 29's a little old even in this day and age. So I kind of pulled her back to 27. So those are some of the changes that happened along the way. And she just independent, she has a best friend named Erica, and her husband, his name is Will, and they own Dingle's Pub. And, it's Will's dad's handed down to him in the old Irish neighborhood. And, they like Guinness and they like Murphy's, and it's just kind of fun stuff, the old dark bar and that kind of thing. It's not a cozy, it's not a hard-boiled guy book, it's a family. I like to think of it as a family story, mystery with some biological presence and the science in it. The science is all made up. People seem impressed, and that makes me feel good, but science is actually my worst subject. So, it's just fiction. And so the crux of the story is Kate sleeps in her office. She gets up one morning, she walks along the docks, she's listening to music, kind of dancing. She's a dancer growing up. She and her brother do the Irish step dancing. The brother's better at it than she is, Michael. And then she sees her father's best friend and he's in his boat. So she runs over and he is dead. So then an investigation ensues and the detective is Rich Madley. He comes on the scene and then she kind of meets this guy, Colin Greeley, who's, the scourge of the neighborhood because he's dabbling in kind of genetically modified fish and a lot of politics around that. And the characters just kind of take off from there. Rhonda's an interesting woman. She's a lobster woman. And so Kate has to go over and kind of work with her for a bit. So Kate is it's a quirk that she has. It's a dichotomy. She is afraid of the ocean. She doesn't like being on boats. She doesn't like being out on the ocean. So she has to go out with Rhonda, and there's a whole, dynamic around that and some common grounds between Rhonda and Kate, some history.
And
so
Kate's position, just so you bring.
At that point, Kate has left the FDA as a consultant and she's moved over to Greeley Labs. She has accepted a job with Greeley Labs. Okay. And I don't want to give you too many spoilers, but.
Yeah, no, I just mean she's a scientist.
She's a marine biologist.
Thank you. Okay, right.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's what I just want to make so people understand what her role is in this community.
And most of it's set in Boston, but it's also in Woods Hole and Falmouth as well. Right.
So, right. I really did appreciate all of that, the real scenery and the real places. So how about any other characters that you want to introduce us to from this waterfront community or the family?
I think those are the main. There's some other. Ed McCann plays a big role. He's Colin Greeley's right-hand man.
Okay. All right. Okay, so you mentioned in a prior interview that you see the docs as a coming of adult story for the protagonist, Kate Finn, that it's an observation, not commentary on classism and racism. What do you mean by that?
So I don't want to beat a reader over the head with, some soapbox. It's just things happen, you observe things. Kate's observing the world she lives in, but she's kind of in her own world at that age, especially. Mm-hmm. And she just accepts things as they are. And her focus is on her work and her friends or relationships, which she's hand selects. She doesn't have a ton of friends. She's not into a giant social life. She has make some mistakes along the way with some of those friendships and some of those relationships. So that's a big dynamic in the story. So she still hasn't, taken the step. She's still attached to her parents' house. She has to grow up, and she's forced into growing up when her father's best friend is killed.
Right. Right. Now, you kind of told us a lot about Kate Finn's character and what went into making her a dimensional, believable human being. Is there anything else that you can think to add to what you said previously that went into her character?
Well, she's a city kid, and she stayed out of trouble. So one of the things with some of these Boston novels and it's always kind of like everybody's in trouble, or they have the accent that's obnoxious, and all these stereotypes. So it's not like that. It's got some cliche stuff, like you have to orient a reader. But she's just a good girl. She was a good kid. Her working class parents. Her parents were hoping. She goes to college. She goes to state school in Boston. They want something better for her. She's torn because she feels this guilt of her working class, and she knows she's very intelligent, and she knows she can soar to very high heights, and she's encouraged by her mentor, Dr. Zion, down in Woods Hole, but she just didn't get there. She's not there yet. And I like the fact that she's just a normal person. She's not some you know, derelict, and she's not, and she's not, you know, some super entitled person either.
Right.
She's
Right.
accessible.
Yeah, and I like that. I won't, without doing a spoiler alert, that she does, right? She's got that. She's flawed in the sense that she doesn't always follow the rules, and
Mhm.
you know, regardless of, you know, the reasoning behind it. And so, I never really thought about what you're saying about the cliche of the. But you're right about the not even just the novels, but any sitcoms or, you know, anything that's cinematic that we see come out of Boston. It is these these rough, very particular, you know, even though you have the Irish in there, I mean, how can you not have, right, that
Right.
the Irish community in there? But a lot of times it's all about the Irish family and the, and you know, like the, I don't want to say like the crime family, but there's some kind of crime family involved and things like that, and the characters are really gritty, and they, you know, so I didn't really make that connection, but that is an
That
interesting.
said, my favorite movie and novel is The Friends of Eddie Coyle. Oh, because that's the Boston I remember. My parents would take us to Boston, you know, we'd go to Jordan Marsh and they'd have the Christmas decorations and the Common. And so that was the Boston in the late 60s, 70s, and they portray it masterfully. So I love that. I think that's more real than some of the other Hollywood stuff that's come out, which is enjoyable. It's really fun to watch, but it's like the perfect storm. And I love Diane Lane. She's my favorite, one of my favorite actors, but she butchered. Oh, it's just painful to listen to in The Perfect Storm.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know that I've not seen that one.
Yeah. Well, it's in Gloucester, actually. Filmed in Gloucester. Yeah.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's kind of interesting. That, so thinking about writing about, I think that would be really interesting to write, to center something around the Christmas season, and then take us back to those 60s, right, through her parents. And so that's right. So there's my homework for you. The teacher is giving you writing homework, but
Don't
that,
make me go back there.
right, that's super fascinating, and people, like, I would be very interested in, right, being able to close my eyes and just, you know, pretend that I'm standing right there. And
Yeah, the MFA has the Bostonian collection, and it has, you know, some of the Boston Common paintings. It's beautiful.
yeah, so many things I wished I could have done while I was in town for residencies, but it's
I
like,
know, we never had time.
right, it's like a whirlwind. So all right, let me see here. And you already answered some of these, so I'm just kind of looking at, okay. All
You
right,
asked,
so I'm just thinking about, because you've already told us a lot about Kate and what makes her independent, and the educated woman she is in the current times. But what can you say about the Battle of the Dames and the feminist touches between Kate and the Lobster Ladies' interactions? So you've told us a little bit about taking her on the boat, you know, without spoiler alerts or anything. Right? So there's this tension between.
So that is where some of the classism or educational snobbery on Kate's part comes in a little bit. And, you know, Rhonda is the hands-on lady. She's a very attractive woman, but, you know, she's chosen this career of being a lobster lady. So she's in a man's world. Kate's in a man's world, but Kate's not, you know, getting her hands dirty, so to speak, where Rhonda is. So there's this, and Rhonda's out, she's just a fearless warrior. She's out on the ocean and no problem. Kate's kind of, you know, a little data person, kind of not as fearless by any means.
Right.
So yeah, there's just and there's I won't give you that spoiler, but there's some common interest in the background going on there.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay. So you've spoken a little bit on this, but in regards to, so what influenced the book's socioeconomic, ethical, religious, and racial implications? So you've talked a little bit about a few of these things, but like we've got this, right, Irish Catholic family, right?
Right.
And, really, we kind of got, I don't even want to say racial implications, I would say classism implications, but you've kind of already spoken about that. But how about the socioeconomic and ethical and religious aspects?
Yeah, well, you know, Seamus is a proud man. So Seamus is Kate's father. And Peggy is right beside him. She doesn't like to question much with Seamus. She's very supportive of him. And sometimes that annoys Kate because she doesn't see her mother having a voice. And so, of course, she goes to the other end. When the story opens, Kate is imprinting herself and has imprinted herself with her dad, not as much her mom. She's never really, she loves her mom, but she's not, aligned with her. And that, she kind of doesn't like to be around her a lot. She just can't wait to get it. There's nothing to talk about. So she kind of is always like checking in and then, okay, I'll see you later. And the mother is long patient with stuff like that. And the irony of it, the whole story is the mother is much more in the community. The mother is much more involved and socially sophisticated than either her husband or Kate, and then Michael as well. Michael is more out there, and they're kind of not accessible, Kate and the father. They're into their own world and a little bit maybe narcissistic even, leaning on it's all about them all the time. So yeah, so there's always somebody that has to be passive, right? When you have this dynamo, and the father's the dynamo pretty much, and then Kate's kind of wants to please, she wants to please, and that's where she hasn't grown up either. She needs to break away from that.
Right, and it's really interesting, like I just made another connection between, as you're saying this, so there's a lot of feminism at play and being challenged between the two women, right? So the daughter really thinks, right, in a feminist, looking at her mom through a feminist lens, like you need a voice and, right, you need to, be more assertive or whatever those other, judgments are, right? And you're just not interesting or, right, there's nothing for us to talk about and all those other things. And then really here's this dynamic woman who maybe is just a little more soft-spoken because, right, she's patient, like you said, but also lets them be the ones that are like, bold and loud and opinionated and everything else. And so that's a really interesting thing, right? Because you see, right, they're both kind of looking at each other from a feminist lens from a different era.
Exactly.
Mom's letting the daughter be bold. Okay, you try to go out there and figure out it. It's you've got all the answers. Clearly, you can't learn anything from me. And right, and then she's looking with the critical lens, like, Mom, you're from an old era where like women were second-class citizens, right? And so it's that is really interesting. It creates a really interesting tension that I didn't pick up on until you started talking about this.
And if you've ever been around science, engineers or scientists, yeah, a lot of them aren't really, things are changing, but they're not really domestic. They eat weird things.
I know, I love it.
The weirdest food.
Right. I was like, does she really mean those little
snowballs?
Yeah, I was like, what? I was like,
snowballs, yeah.
Right, that's what she means. She likes her snowballs. That was a very interesting thing, but very, very accurate. I have 3 young adult daughters, and they have weird stuff like that. Sometimes they'll say, well, you haven't bought me blah, blah, blah in a long time. And I'm like, you're an adult. Right? And then they're like, well, I still like that. I'll always love that. Okay, well then you know where to find it. And you know how to put it in the freezer.
It's home. I have a theory that when your kids, after they're married, they move out, when they come in the house and they don't open the refrigerator, then they're totally independent.
Yeah, right.
They do it for a long time, till at least 25. They come in, first thing they do, they open, and it's kind of a mother feeds their children, it's kind of.
Right. So thinking about the Irish Catholic family, right? That this is Kate's family. Were there any specific additional?
I feel like I'm looking weird with this camera. I hope it works out. Sorry.
No, you're perfectly fine. What types of biases? How did you navigate those? Right. So there are these interesting. Like the family has these religious traditions, and then the adult kids don't so much, right? They don't respect them the same way, right? Which is a very revealing characteristic of most kids, right? You have, this moving away from those traditions, and they adopt new traditions or reject those traditions altogether, or those views. What went into navigating that?
So Kate, maybe it's a stereotype. Some scientists aren't, totally religious, and they're always questioning. She doesn't outright reject her parents' faith.
Right.
Admires it, actually, but she's just not built that way. And she wishes she could be, but she's too much of a questioner, and so she can't just take things on blind faith, and she just doesn't. She goes on in her own world. And Michael doesn't say much, her brother, about the faith, but he has other things going on. So one would think maybe, although there's a scene where they go to church, Michael runs away because he doesn't like being on Fish Pier, and they end up in the church and together, and
Right.
He seems to be into his faith there.
Now, do you have a Catholic background, or is this something you're just writing from, just in a fictional sense? Or was there anything that influenced?
Well, Rivier is a Catholic college. I went from 12 years of Catholic school in uniform. My father's parents were straight off the boat from County Kerry, and so I have a family of 10, like Irish Catholic family.
Wow.
My mom, I think, has a little bit of orange man in her, so she's got a little Brit. But her parents were a couple of generations. They were maybe her grandparents or great-grandparents, but my dad's parents, his mother spoke Gaelic. She just never really assimilated completely here. So lots of Irish stuff.
Nice. It seemed like you had an authentic, insight, but again, some of the science stuff, I was like, wow, I wonder, I had myself I wonder if this is a real thing, because I know genetically modified fish is a real thing. And I was like, I wonder how much, did she bring in, does she know about this, right? I know sometimes I read student research essays and I'm like, oh, I love this, right? I'm going to bring it into my writing, as now I know a little bit more about this. So I kind of got the sense that you had, and a lot of times, that's what we do. We write what's familiar, and we're able to then bring in the dimension of that, right? So the beauty of it, right? The roots of it, the flaws in it, or the evolution of it. But I like the fact that you emphasize, that she respects that, she admires that about her parents, and which is an interesting dimension too to her character, because a lot of people who reject faith or question it are totally dismissive, the science, it can't be. But to be able to look at someone and say, I envy the fact that you don't have to have all of those, everything doesn't have to be scientifically proven for you to still have that faith, and how beautiful it is to watch that faith operate through people, through a marriage and through a lifetime. And so and I did get that appeal from this cast of characters, that she wasn't entirely, which I really liked, because most scientists that that are protagonists or main characters in something create this, it's a total rejection, and which then just diminishes your roots, if that's where you came from, so how do you separate yourself from, but also still be connected to that family, because that's a part.
Because there's so many rituals. And her best friend Erica, they don't reject their roots, and there's that thing where some people are constantly rejecting their roots, and then they lose home, so to speak.
Right, exactly. They become a nomad. So yeah.
But that said, there is some assimilation questions always when I grew up outside of Boston, and that's a tight community, and there's a whole different flavor there. Right. And so I didn't grow up there, and sometimes you worry about that. You worry about the fishermen. Are you portraying the fishermen properly? There's Asians in my book, Chinese specifically, and that was a concern for me, to make sure that I wasn't stepping on toes with that. And so there were some of those concerns where, especially in this day and age, everything's shifting and lingo shifting, and so I was concerned a bit about some of that stuff. But again, you have to remind yourself it is fiction, and you have to release yourself from. You'll never write a story if you don't have some kind of boundaries getting pushed a little bit.
Right. But I like too that you are familiar enough with the, you know, the ethnicities and the races that would exist in the community to bring them in. So you can't, right? So when we talk about, right, bringing racial characters into our, you know, we can't whitewash everything. So, and so that's another thing. A lot of people are like, well, I'm not trying to whitewash my stuff, but I can't give myself permission to bring in these racial or interracial characters, but it's like, you have to.
Right.
You have to bring them in, but then you also have to do the homework to make sure that you've made them authentic and not like this big stereotype either. But sometimes you can't help it, right? Because maybe they own the dry cleaning in town, right? But that's right, or the restaurant in town, like that's not cliche. That's really what, right? That's they know that model of business, and so they're going to gravitate toward it. And so every community has, you know, specific things that you know, not every community has, but most communities have diversity, and we have
Yeah, and we always went to this Chinese restaurant, and our friend Annie was from Mongolia actually, and she was so funny. We try to order things. She goes, no, that's too Chinese for you. You can't have that. So, she would make the decisions on what we could get. No, you're not gonna like that. That's not, and she wouldn't serve it to us. So then she went back to Mongolia, and this was way back when email was first starting. She sent us emails, she sent us pictures. She was so funny. But they all lived across the street in this apartment building, and you know, it rotated. So people would move out, they'd live here for a bit, then you know, they'd leave. So a lot of that is kind of, you know, covered in the book too.
But it's real, right?
Yeah.
That's real. And so how can you not appreciate that? How can we shy away from keeping those? Sorry, I've got all kind of weird stuff going on here now. So now we've got machines firing up. Okay, so I think, I don't know if we talked about this or if we want to talk about this part. You do bring some interesting polarities between humanitarianism and immorality into it. I don't know if there's anything you're prepared to talk about that doesn't, you know, spoil anything significant in the book. But if there's anything that you do want to talk about, what inspired these qualities, and how did you allow these things to define the characters, you know, as they surface? Because, you know, you made an interesting comment about how I'm not a planner, I'm a pantser, right? So I was thinking about, like, I haven't heard that term in forever. And I was thinking about, I am a planter. But I used to be, right? I used to be a pantser only. And then I realized that I need to do a little bit of planning too. I need to know at least, like, you know, what might be up in the road ahead, or maybe some destinations I'm trying to get at. And so I frame that question as they surface, right? Because qualities and characters usually surprise us, the writer, as we're like, wow, she thought that, she did that, she said that, right? It's not something where we're like, oh, right, we've got all the dialogue planned out, and we've got all of the, like, every nuance of their personality planned out. So that's what I, you know, also mean, like, what, how did you allow those things, right, to surface?
Yeah, the planters are good. I actually looked when I was emailing you Panther. I was like, let me check that spelling, and then planter came up. I'm like, well, maybe I am a little bit more of a planter, but it has to come organically as a panther, and then I can come back in the editing and start, you know, the editing's constantly going on in your head. So yeah, the idea is as old as we are, the good and evil, right? Good versus evil, and in between there's a whole bunch of gray area. So, you know, everybody wants their territory. That was another thing we talked about, maybe territory being a hot button. And so here's the fishermen and the people that own, you know, these giant companies that are exporting the fish, and where do all the players belong? Well, guess what? It goes back to Cain and Abel. I want to be loved more. I want more love than my brother gets, you know, these kind of things. And everybody's always pulling for that, whether it's approval or money, right? Power, these kind of things. So everybody's imperfect. So Kate can be the protagonist and she can do great things, but yeah, she's jealous and she's petty at times, and she's, crosses the line. And in fact, that was one thing that I worked with a developmental editor, Sterling actually had referred her, Beverly Swirling, and she's lovely. Unfortunately, she passed away. But she talked to me about the idea of, I had Kate doing some things that she wasn't thinking that the reader was going to appreciate. And I don't get too hung up on what the reader is going to appreciate, because then it ruined, you can't think, you can't write. But it was it was like the 8th draft or something at that point that we were working on together. And so I kind of took her advice. I just went with it and did what she asked. I won't tell you what it is because I don't want to spoil it, but she was, she thought I'd lose the female readers. And she had
exactly what you're talking about. Good call.
Yeah. So, right. And even the way it is, my son's girlfriend at the time's like, I'm very upset about this. I was like, sorry.
It's very real. I mean, the characters feel very real, right? So
Good.
that's when that happens, that's a beautiful development. So so even with changing that, it's still right. We don't have to like everything about our characters. And like the readers don't have, right? If we have a perfect character, then we don't care about, right? It's like, we almost are kind of like, please let something bad happen to her. You know what I'm saying? Like, she's too perfect. We can't love the perfect character. We're not, none of us do, right? So we're not pulling for the perfect character. We need
the hero's journey. Yeah. It's
right.
always the hero's journey.
Right. And it's a challenge to be human, to say, I still love her despite, right? It's like any character, just like we would in real life, is like, there has to be flaws, and they can't be like, it can't just be little flaws, right? And that's what we probably, I teach creative writing also, and I also, manuscript edit. So I work with people on their manuscripts, and that's the kind of stuff I say. You can't, this character, I don't mean like she's clumsy and she says the wrong thing and stutters. That's right. Those are little flaws, right? So, and then you're just making her way too cliche, quirky. I mean big flaws, right? Like some like big, like an injustice, or right, something that's like, oh my gosh, right? That makes the person human. Like, okay, even you break the rules, or okay, even you you're weak or vulnerable, or you're whatever it is, it has to be appropriate to the character. But
yeah, I think it even goes further. I was thinking about this very thing the other day, and the whole idea of readers in relationship with their characters, your characters that you've written. And it's a little deeper, that I think readers want to feel superior. I think they want to say, I would never do that. I'm a good person. Right. Sometimes, yeah. At least I'm not that messed up.
Yeah, right. But then again, that's what some people need, right? If they can make them feel like, well, at least I'm not that messed up, then they're like, oh, you poor thing, right? And that they're still there. We're a complex cast of characters in the real world. And so, and that's when we consider what, right, appealing to a readership, we have to think about, in that target audience, who might be in those outer rings of our target might also be, right, people of the same, right, age group, right? If it's a young adult novel, they might, but there's still going to be differences, right? So there's no way to just write for just a target. Like, okay, I just want a bullseye here, because you can't possibly know. Maybe if you were writing the 4th book in a series or the 3rd book in a series, you might know your readership a little bit better, and what their sensibilities are. And they might write you and tell you what those sensibilities are too. But, for the most part, you have to think about a broader readership and be able to write, be able to work that into, and I think we don't think about that as we're writing, but it's there. It's at work in our subconscious, where we're like,
well, we know what we like to read, and no doubt we're probably writing at that level. And, these talks are so fun because you get to talk about the nuts and bolts. But I'm getting more into the book group, and it's so different when we have a talk about writing versus when you go and the readers tell you these things about the book, and it's so much fun. I love that part.
I do too. I miss that part because I haven't really published anything in a while, but I've been so focused on getting other things done. So it's just not the season for me to have things published, but I love getting those notes and getting the exact feedback and sometimes a different insight or interpretation or takeaway from it. And it's like, I love to get that. Or even the angry email. Like she wasn't so.
Yeah, I got a 1 star the other day, and it's kind of good. It balances it.
I know. I was gonna say, and so right, you look at that and you're like, okay, all right.
Who was it? Who did I piss off lately?
Right. But then again, right? Then it gives you that, you're like 4.5 stars or 4 and 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Suspicious if they're all.
Right.
I honestly don't get too hung up on it. You know, it's gonna be, if people like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't.
And it's out in the world.
Yeah.
Right. And no one can take that from you. Right. That's the part where I was so excited, where I was like, you can say whatever you want because like this book is out in the world and there will be a readership that loves this book. And
well, look at you. I mean, how many volumes is this now? How many?
So that's the 32nd issue.
That's amazing.
And I love it. Like, seriously, I love it. And even through this pandemic, there were so many behind the scenes things falling apart and people telling me, like, just don't publish it. People will understand. And I was like what?
You won't understand. Yeah.
What do you mean don't publish it? And I was like, no. Like, I will pull it off. And it was a little bit crazy. I had to put on too many hats this time, but I just pulled it back, right? I just made it a little smaller and I said, all right, it'll just be a little smaller and we're going to have high quality of what we put in there. And I thoroughly enjoyed the feature interview and collection. And, you know, we talk about first, right? So like my debut book, your debut book, this particular poet has not published her stuff in digital. Like she's in, you know, an anthology or a couple of anthologies in a couple of places in print, but she does not have anything. And when I started realizing that, I was like, she's a brilliant writer. And I was like, this is an injustice, but I thought, what a great opportunity to be able to be somebody's debut and to get her out there. And in doing that, she was realizing, oh my God, I need a platform. Like, I need to share my work and I need to publish my manuscript. And it just gave her, right? So it's like, we invest in each other. Who knows what impact we'll have on each other. But just reading the letters that I got back from her was in seeing the comments, right, that people were saying to her, I was like, this is why I do it. Like, totally. Like,
I'm so glad you did. That was, I mean, the quality of Pink Panther, it's exceptional. I have to say, I wish I can you see it. It's kind of hard to see, but.
If you hold it right in front of you. Nope. Like,
okay. How's that?
It's like part of it. It's so funny with that background.
I know.
Yes.
Anyhow, Pink Panther magazine is amazing, and it's just the quality and the paper grade, you know, so thick and it's beautiful.
Thank you. I've tried figuring out a different way to publish it, but every other way is super thin magazine print, and I'm like, I can't do it. So that's on my thing. You know, that's on my list of things to you know, possibly change in the future. Hopefully we can get subscriptions going more.
So what time do you get up in the morning? How do you do all this?
Honestly, it's like I've been scaling down. So I moved 2 different daughters to 2 different states in less than a month. It was like 2.5 weeks time, and put the magazine out. I was literally had my laptop in my lap, driving across country while someone else was driving. I was working on the magazine, and I do this all the time to pull things off. So this is how I pull it off. Some people, they write, like Meg, she brings a book everywhere she goes. So if she's standing in line, she can read. I bring my laptop when I travel so that I can work on stuff while I'm in the car, which I'm trying to free that up because I want to just look out the window. I just want to be an observer, but that wasn't my season. And so in order for me to pull that off, I had to, you know, put in those 16-hour days and just, you know, like, okay, give me so much time on this, give me so much time on that. Because I also have other freelance projects and other things too that I was working on.
Teaching and writing.
Right. And so, you know what, I made time. I finished my manuscript for my daughter. I wrote about a mother's witness of a daughter's cancer and chemo and radiation experience, and just living with a lifetime of mental illness on top of it. And I finally finished it and I sent it off, and I wrote a few pieces. So I was like, okay, I'm writing, this is awesome. And they're some of the best pieces I've ever written. But that helps, right? When you take some time away and you're just observing and you're just meditating and you're intimate with your work. So when you sit down with it again, that inspiration just hits. It's not like, what am I going to write about? You know where the holes are in your manuscript, and you're like, okay, I'm going to tackle that. And you've been thinking about it for weeks and weeks. And weeks.
Yeah. Sandra Schofield used to always say that writing is planning.
Yeah. And so it's very true. And so, I mean, I did all these things, but it literally was just like, just a little piece here, a little piece there, a little piece there. And then I literally finished the magazine on the ride home on Tuesday. And I was like, and it's done, and I can publish it. And I was like, that is talk about sliding in under the radar. That's probably the tightest it's ever been. But all things considered, with all the things that went wrong behind the scenes, I call it a victory. So I'm like, whatever.
Oh, good work. Yeah. You're on deadline. You're on your own deadline.
And that was the other thing. Like, my friend was like, well, what happens if you published it tomorrow or Friday? And I was like, it's due today. Like, it comes out on the same 2 days every year. It's due today. So it will happen. And so I was like, it's just going to happen, and stop talking to me. But, whatever. And I think if you talk to any other editor of a journal or a magazine, they would probably tell you similar things. So many things fall between the pages, fall off the pages, and you're like, now what do we do? But you're already thinking about things that you could do in the future. So you're like, well, maybe we'll do that now. And so, right. So you're, hopefully you're not at a total loss of things, but, I think we talked a lot about, I'm just looking sure I didn't miss anything. No, I thoroughly enjoyed your book, and I wasn't sure what to expect, because it's not typically a genre that I pick up, or I haven't picked it up in 15 years. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to read it. I want to review it, and I wanted to set up this interview. And then I was, so one of the things I love about, and I told you this off camera, was in the summer, I work poolside and on my back patio. So I'm out there in my bathing suit with my laptop in the shade, and there's only so much, so many hours in the day. Well, then when I said, send me the book, and I got so excited because we had a whole bunch of beautiful weather right after you sent me the book.
Oh,
and
good.
Here I am floating in my pool with and I'm like, I'm working, right? And it felt like I was back in grad school when I was floating in the pool with my books, and I'd be like annotating things, and I'm like, and I would send pictures to my friends, like, I'm doing homework right now, and I'm floating around in my pool, and Perfect. I loved it. So that was a huge blessing to be able to read the book, and I actually enjoyed it while I'm laying in the sun, floating around the pool. And
that's great. That was one of the problems with a lot of the agents, and that I didn't get too much into the smaller publishing companies, because I figured I created my own Neptune, and I know that I'm going to glean it, and I hired my own editors because, at that point, I didn't really need a small publisher. I could do it myself. So, one of the things was the idea that there was no place on the shelf for it is what I got. A lot of rejection. There's no place on the shelf for it because it isn't strict genre. It's the family, involvement, which you do always have some bits of that in any genre novel, but they seem to struggle with that a little bit. It was something different, which I'm proud of, because I don't want to be in a category. I don't want that. Maybe that's silly of me, but I really don't. So
no, I think hybrid is a fun, right? We have genres that we like, and I think being able to take from those and say, I don't want it to be all about this, right? I don't want it to be all this genre and be stuck to the conventions and the expectations within that genre. And I think there are more readers who like multiple genres than they are, right? I mean, maybe you have your sci-fi fanatics, which I know, right? The straight sci-fi. I only read real sci-fi. It can't be fantasy. It can't be magic realism, right? And so they're like, it has to be scientifically plausible, and they're super, and that's all they read, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe they're like, that's all they read is vampire, right? Stories. And so there are those people. I won't say there aren't, but I would say there are more people who have, right, different genres that they love, and that they try to change those up because you get burned out anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that could be too why I found your book refreshing after a 15-year break from reading, you know, specific, I don't know, what would you, I'm thinking, I thought it was just mystery. Like
So it's so funny when you go to the bookstores. So the whole idea with independent bookstores, which are always pushed, is you can do a consignment with them often.
Yes.
They'll take your book on consignment. So one of them in Concord, Mass, the Concord bookstore, one lady was like, "It's fiction." No, it's mystery. It kept going back and forth. So
Right.
I kind of, I call it fish noir.
I love
And it's like fiction, family fiction, you know, mystery. I think it's a bio mystery, I guess, is what
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so anyhow, it's like, how do you, you know, why do we, I guess it's easy, right? You need it for library cataloging and stuff. We need to have these genres, but at some point, you're right, the indie stores are the best. I loved when I dropped back into school and decided I was gonna, you know, study to be a writer. I started going to the indie stores, which I really had gone into before, but it was always like, do you have this book? It wasn't to say, where is this genre, or right, where you could just look at all of the, like, okay, I know that author, okay, and, you know, start to grab things. And I loved when I was fascinated with magic realism for a really long time. And it was during a time where it didn't really have a big bookshelf presence. And so I would say, where's the magic realism? And they would always give me 3 other genres that it's near. It's on one shelf around the corner from sci-fi near fantasy, right? And so, because those had their sections, and then this just had a little shelf that was, they didn't know what to do with it, right? It doesn't.
Yeah. North Americans, you know.
Right, right. But I just remember thinking, I can appreciate this, and I learned so much about subgenres from indie bookstores. From just going in
there.
Yeah,
they love it. What I love even more though, librarians are your friends. They're the best friends you can ever have, and they're not into any money or profit or, you know, the supply chain. They have their own supply chain, obviously, but they're so great to work with. I love the librarians. I go in with my book. I generally donate, but sometimes they offer to buy, and they give you a receipt, you know, if you want to, you know, write it off on your taxes or whatever. But yeah, they're just so excited to receive a book. Sometimes the bookstores are, as much as they want you to, you know, support them, it doesn't go both ways. So sometimes they're just very dismissive, but the librarian is always just wonderful.
Right. Yeah, I agree. If you can get the actual librarian to, you know, come up to the counter, they're always so helpful too. And can we invite you in, and can we do this, right? Can we do an author talk, and so they want to promote you, especially if you're a local. And I agree. I'm so in love with librarians, and I try to get my students, even at the college level, I'm like, I'm like, you know where the smartest people are on this entire campus? It's not all the PhD candidates in their departments with tenure. It's the librarians. They not only know everything, they know where everything is hiding, and if they can't find it or don't know how to find it, they will figure it out and let you know. I was like,
gosh, they'll stay all night.
There is no one on this campus that will do all of that for you. And they read the books, so they don't just know where they are on the shelves. They've also read most of these books, and so they're just a wealth of knowledge and help. And so sometimes my students, a lot of them don't even bother, but the ones who do go, they're like, you weren't kidding. I asked them, they're like, I just asked them questions just to keep them talking. They never ran out of answers.
So the best part was, for all of this, there were many great parts, but a lot of friends came out of the woodwork, you know, like a girl that I had gone through second grade through high school, Tina. She was a town manager in my hometown, and she set up, contacted the library, and because she was on the board, Nevin's library, which is it has a little cachet. They get a lot of great writers in Methuen. So they set up on February 1st. I had this writing event, and it was just so amazing, and it was well attended, and because of them mostly. They did all the marketing. It was just great.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have really enjoyed talking to you. I know we went a little longer than
yeah, I guess so.
I thought we were going to go, but thank you for your patience in all the technical problems. So I will go ahead and dub over the recording. I don't think there's really anything to take out of. It's been a really great flowing conversation. So I will make sure I convert this over, and then I will get it up on, I'll probably put it on my YouTube and then share it on Facebook so that there's a space for it to go. And then eventually it'll be on the website, but I don't want to delay it, because obviously I was hoping this would live stream. So so expect that soon. Hopefully the recording comes through rather quickly. As soon as I get the email, I'm going to put it up on our Facebook.
Okay, excellent.
So thank you again for being so generous, and I will be in touch too about planning that author roundtable about writing about female characters. So so I will be in touch. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Jen. You look great. Take care of yourself.
So do you. I love the background. I'm getting on that. It's on my list.
You can keep changing it constantly.
I know. I love it. I just gotta get on. I gotta do it. I gotta get on the trend. So all right. You take care.
Okay. You too. Bye now.